also share that with us if you would like that. And at this point, I will hand over to Tamara so that she can present and take it away.
All right, thank you very much. You're making me blush. Telling me my smile is nice. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to Randy and for the South Florida chapter for having me here tonight. I'm really excited to be here. This is a topic that I thought I had something to say when I first developed this presentation. And now I realize that I have probably enough material for 2 or 3 or 4 presentations. So more to come on that. So tonight we're here to talk about business process redesign and specifically what you need to know before your organization commits to an effort of that magnitude. And to do that, I'm going to put it into context for you here. So let me make sure this is actually going to go forward. Yay, okay. For context, I work for Children International, which is a nonprofit based in Kansas City, Missouri. Our mission is to provide with kids in developing nations with the tools that they need to help bring themselves and their families out of poverty. In short, we bring people together to end poverty for good, one kid at a time. We serve about 196,000 kids in 10 countries, mostly Latin America, but also we have a couple of agencies in the Philippines, in Sahai, and in Zambia as well, in Lusaka. From 1980 to about 2014, under our sponsorship model, your monthly donation might go to directly support a child's family with financial supplements. However, by about 2014, the educational research really showed that this model doesn't actually help bring people out of poverty. It doesn't help them build long-term financial sustainability. So in 2014, a new CEO was brought on board and she put the brakes on our entire organization right off the bat. She said, stop signing up new sponsors, stop signing up new kids. We got to figure out a better way to do this. And we went into full-on maintenance mode. And for about a year and a half, 2 years, no, I take that back. It was actually more like 4 by the time they got done with that. All the focus was on our programs team and rethinking from the ground up how we were going to serve our kids. What emerged from that process at the end of 2016 is a new model by which we concentrated on what we call strategic objectives. And that is to say, every child would graduate from our programs healthy, educated, employable, and empowered to break the cycle of poverty for themselves. And instead of doing this with directly providing them with money, we used it to fund programs that keep kids on grade level, that give them basic medical and dental benefits. And then, also taught them financial literacy through a program called Aflatoon, and we partnered with Aflatoon. And then also for the older kids, we taught them skills that were needed in their areas so that they could become employable. So by the time that I joined the organization in late 2018, we had already gone through some pretty major organizational changes. And if you've ever heard that term, who moved my cheese, there was a lot of cheese that had already been moved around. So, story time. I'm 3 days into the job. The first time that I hear someone refer to Bob's code in that way that we business analysts all have come to recognize was not meant as a compliment. 5 days into the new job, I'm in a discovery meeting with one of our marketing managers. And there's another developer in the room and myself, the business analyst, and the marketing manager is pitching an idea for a new way to test the effectiveness of one of our marketing campaigns. And I'm about to start asking some probing questions just to get more information. And the developer holds up his hand and he says, now wait a second. For us to do that, that means we'd have to crack open Bob's code. And that would just be too much regression risk. The system is too fragile. No way we can get this done. And the conversation was effectively over with. And they all filed out of the room, and I was still sitting there with my mouth hanging open going, how did a developer just completely derail a project before it ever got off the ground? Finally, 10 days into the new job, I got my first opportunity to sit down with the IT applications manager and get a technical overview of our stack and what we were working with. And so the first thing I did when I sat down with him was I said, okay, before we get started, could you please tell me who Bob is and what's up with his code that everyone is so afraid of it? And I got a really sheepish look. And there was a, okay, better settle in for this one. He said, Tamara, the first thing that you need to know is that our product Aptify is the absolute heart of our operations. It's what we use to connect our sponsors to our kids. It helps us to collect the money. It helps us to make sure it gets to the field. It helps us make sure that our sponsors get their kids' correspondence and their photos, everything end to end. When we first purchased Aptify, it was an off-the-shelf product, and it was new technology. This was the year 2000. It was new technology, and it was great. But right away, we realized that it wasn't going to serve our needs as a nonprofit. It had a lot of great features, and that was enough to make us decide to purchase it, but we needed more. So right away, we started customizing it, he said. Well, a few years down the road, we were heavily customized by this time. Aptify was bought out by another company. And that company said, yeah, we're moving everyone to a .NET platform, and we're going to need you to upgrade all your systems and your customizations. And at that time, we had neither the money nor the resources to do that. And so the vendor said, see you later. And we were responsible for ourselves. We thought, okay, well, we've got some developers who know what they're doing, but then the developers started leaving for other jobs, the way that developers do when they get a better job offer, right? And pretty soon, there was only one guy left. Guess who that was? Bob. So while he was a perfectly competent developer, he was left holding the bag. So he said, well, and I'm going the wrong direction here. And finally, Bob left too. And there was only one person left in the organization who could still code in Visual Basic 6. Yeah, that's where we were at that point. So the IT manager says, well, we decided we'd go for Dynamics and Microsoft Dynamics, and we started trying to replicate some of our functionality in Dynamics. And that proved to be both really expensive and a complete boondoggle because it didn't work at all. We sunk a lot of money and a lot of time for very little output. He said, so, well, here I go again. So here we are. It's 2018. Our software is at the absolute end of life, and it resides on obsolete hardware, obsolete servers as well, by the way. That was when that last Windows Server expansion was being deprecated. He said, we're accumulating technical debt faster than we can keep up with it. So rather than trying to do new stuff, mostly we just work around it, which is how you got to that outcome in that particular meeting. And at that point, I'm really small in my chair going, oh, I'm so sorry I asked that question. But how many of us has been there, right? You ask and you're like, did you really want to know that answer? So before I continue with my story, I feel like it's important to set some expectations here. You're not going to leave here tonight with a very detailed project plan for how to do business process redesign. What I do want you to walk away with is the ability to differentiate between process management and business process redesign, which you'll also hear referred to as re-engineering, and understand why you might do one versus the other. And then finally, have some tools to use to gauge whether going that route is actually right for your organization. It also helps to start with an understanding of all the things called business process. So let's hit some of the high points. First, there's business process design. And this is the process of developing a new workflow, developing a new end-to-end process. Business process modeling is the visual representation of the steps in a process. And when I say visual, that could be written, that could be modeled. And to that point, BPMN, business process modeling notation, is a very specific syntax or methodology used for modeling those processes. And then business process management are incremental modifications over time to your existing processes to improve the outcome or their efficiency. And then finally, we have the big mama, the business process re-engineering. When you have a startup, you may not have a simple product or a simple idea, but the way is pretty straightforward. You have a product, you have a customer, you have a way to get that product to that customer. There's some pretty straightforward places to start. Those may not be simple, but they're also not terribly complex, and you're less cluttered with alternate workflows. This is where business process design and modeling can happen. It may start out as, we'll figure this out as we go along. And then eventually you get into a rhythm where you found a thing that works pretty well, and you start training new team members. And that offers a good opportunity to test into a process that works really well. Because you're having to train new team members, you may end up formalizing that process, and it's written down, modeled in either words or symbols. And eventually, if you're really sophisticated, you might buy a fancy tool and get it recorded with BPMN using actual syntax that your developers will geek out over. But if you're successful as a business, ultimately that business matures and things change. And business maturity brings with it more complexity. You get demanding customers who want a one-off process, and there's this one customer who's bringing in $1 million, and therefore you design something special just for them. You add more products and more services and more ways to deliver those products and services. This is where exception processing starts to come in. We're going to do it this way, except when that happens, otherwise we'll do this thing. And then let's not forget about market strategy shifts as the market changes, and one large company gets sued and then all of the others have to follow suit. I'm going to use as my example last year, are we going to censor or are we not going to censor? Facebook, Google, Twitter, everybody. Look at the way that payment methods have changed over time. It used to be that people wrote out a physical check and they would mail it to Children International. And then we would open up the envelopes and process the check and stamp it and courier it to the bank. Well, over time, we introduced ACH payment methods and phone payments and web payments, and all of these different things added complexity, right? So at that point, you really want to start thinking about process management. Process management is for long-term maintenance, for tweaking and optimizing what you've already got going. That can grow and contract with your needs, but generally it's going to be built into your day-to-day operations. You'll figure out a better way to do it as you go along. So it's not terribly risky or disruptive, even if you say, okay, full stop for a month and let's figure out if we're actually doing this the best way possible. That's temporarily inconvenient for some folks, but still not rising to the level of redesign in the way that I'm going to be speaking about it. So, for example, until last summer, at CI, a care team representative would accept every piece of mail that came from a sponsor and was ultimately intended for one of our sponsored kids. And they would read it for appropriateness. Now, what we're looking for are bad language, specific references to religious beliefs, because we're a secular organization and we don't push our beliefs on someone else, and personal information where the sponsor is saying, hey, you can reach me at my home email address here and here, or this is my Facebook profile, reach out to me directly. Those are all no-nos because of child safety and privacy. So our care team reps would have to read each and every letter for appropriateness, approve it, and then send it on down the line. Then we implemented a project to use an optical character recognition reader to read most of the letters. And our data analysts team developed a program in R to analyze the content of those letters and give them a score. So this score has a 90% appropriateness level. And then after a period of parallel testing where they read, where care team members read those letters to make sure they agreed with the score that had been given, they felt confident enough to put a process into place that basically cut our manual review of all these letters by about 70%. So huge, huge time saver, hundreds of hours a year. So that's one example of a pretty major piece of process management that we did. Often that process management is tactical, and sometimes it can be strategic, but a lot of times it's organic and it's managed from the bottom up or from somewhere in management. They say, hey, can we do this better? But eventually there comes a point where if your business continues to grow, it becomes so complex that it's really hard to control and maintain the challenges, and they all start to pile up. And the next thing you know, you're in a really bad sci-fi movie and your operation looks like a giant city on wheels barreling down, dystopian England. So at that point, slow and steady doesn't cut it anymore. So let's talk BPR, actual business process redesign, and its guiding principles, because this is a much bigger thing. Business process redesign is the fundamental rethinking and radical redesign of business processes to achieve dramatic improvements in critical contemporary measures of performance like cost, quality, service, and speed. That is the textbook definition. It goes all the way back to 1993. The bold in yellow is mine because those stand out. Radical redesign and dramatic improvements. We're not talking incremental. We're talking amputation, start over, heart transplant level stuff. So, founding principles. What are the principles of business process redesign? For starters, you want to organize around your outcomes, not the tasks to get to those outcomes. Classic business analyst question, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is it that we're trying to get to? Thinking about the long term and the end game. Second, you want to identify all the things and then prioritize. And when I say all the things, I mean you have to identify all your business critical processes. And as my vice president put it to us, he said recently, if Aptify permanently crashed tomorrow, what must we have in place to keep our operations running? What would we be doing manually to keep the lights on? Those are the business critical processes. That's pretty scary because with 150,000+ sponsors, that would be a lot of work to keep up with manually. So we better get our butts in gear and get this replatforming effort done, right? Integrate technology where it's appropriate to achieve the outcome. And this is where developers don't like me. They think that there's a technical solution to everything, and that's just not always the case. So as a business analyst or as a product owner, if that's the role that you hold, it's your job to figure out when it's right and appropriate to use technology in new and cool and fun ways, and when it's just fine if someone does a little bit of manual processing now and then. What's that pain threshold for them? What's the level of effort that it's going to take versus what it would take to put in that new fancy Power BI workflow, right? Treat your geographically dispersed resources as though they were centralized. That does not mean you need to co-locate in the same office building, but for example, one of our major improvements as part of this long-term rethinking of our business strategy is that each one of our agencies had their own Microsoft set of licenses. We just got done with an effort to bring them all under the same umbrella so that we can all talk to each other within the same Microsoft Teams structure, rather than having to get separate licenses for Colombia and Ecuador and Zambia and so forth. So just by being able to bring people together to speak to each other on the same piece of technology has been transformational in and of itself. Next, when multiple activities lead to the same outcome, try and integrate them. You know, get rid of the excess fat in that case. And since you're going to the same outcome, what is it that's similar about those different activities that could be integrated together? And how can you make that more efficient? Put the decision point where the work is performed. This is classic auto manufacturing philosophy. The people who are on the floor, on the front lines, know best how to serve the customer. So in our case at Children International, we do a lot of consulting with our care team, the people who are on the phone, because they know what our sponsors are asking for. They know what things our sponsors are asking about our kids. You know, what's the status of my child? Because I know he's in Honduras and Honduras just had a Category 5 hurricane. Can you tell me what's going on with my child? Well, let's see what we can tell you. And that might not be easy to do because Honduras has no electricity at that point, and most of the staff members' houses are completely underwater and the community center is closed because, hello, hurricane, right? So those are the kinds of things we need to be sensitive to for our sponsors. Capture information once and at the source. And this is where I become an advocate for data warehouses and data lakes, because it does you no good to have a sponsor address in system A and a sponsor address in system B and then have to sync them up to one another, because what's your source of truth? What happens when they get out of sync with one another? It's just extra bloat on your processes. So decide where your source of truth lies for any given system and stick to it and build your data modeling around that. So with this in mind, how do you know when it's time to go big or go home? So let's talk symptoms for a little bit here. And I'm going to come directly into some of the things that we were experiencing at Children International. Let's start with a pain chart. First, think about your own organization for just a minute. If it was a person and they came to the ER, how much pain would they be in right now? And what kind of pain is it? Because we don't do amputations for a broken leg, except in some extreme circumstances, unless it's become infected. If we think of business process redesign as being at the level of amputations and organ transplants, we really want to be careful with how we proceed, because that's a huge, huge disruptive, transformative, life-changing event. So why would we perform that level of surgery on an organization unless it was absolutely necessary? At Children International, everyone instinctively felt this pain every time we said we have to do it that way because that's the way Aptify was designed and we can't customize it anymore, and Band-Aids, right? Basic marketing mailings with A/B tests that everybody else can do were a challenge for us. They were complex to set up and implement. And the limitations of our tools kept us from pursuing all those initiatives that we just knew would benefit us and ultimately let us send more money to our kids in the field. But pain is really highly subjective, right? You can't build a KPI around that. So how do you ground it in data? So here are some of the metrics that you can measure against if you're wanting to measure organizational pain. How difficult is it really to scale up your current resources, using your current resources? If you didn't hire another developer, and in our case, let's just say we wanted to add another 50,000 sponsors in the next year, how hard would that be? Could we support that? Or would our systems break? How resource intensive would it be? What's your technical debt load, and is it growing rather than shrinking? Now, when I say technical debt, I refer to those things that are left at the end of a project where you said, bug, must fix, critical, must fix, critical, must fix, got to this one, and you're like, yeah, we need to fix that, but let's go to production anyway. It's not a showstopper, right? And you put those that aren't showstoppers off to one side, and somehow they just keep piling up like a closet full of old sports equipment that you haven't looked at till you open up your closet one day and the contents spill out on you, right? So are your business processes driving up your costs, not reducing them? Another way to look at this is, how much is your ROI on each project? Are you getting less bang for your buck per project? At first, you know, like a project like the one I was describing earlier, where we used the optical character recognition to reduce the number of man hours it took to scan our letters, that was a huge win. But that was really rare. And that was a pretty big deal for us. We need more like that. And less like the, oh, okay, well, this has got a 0.1% return, right? This will save us $10,000 over the next 5 years. We need to do better than that, right? And how often are the same data points stored across multiple systems? How hard is it to keep all of your systems in sync with each other? So these are all things that you can develop KPIs around that will make sense ultimately to your management, and that's who you've got to convince. So here I was, this is the end of 2018, and I'm sitting in the IT manager's office, and he's giving me all these buzzwords, heart of our operation, and no more vendor support, and software end of life, and I'm like going, and you're working around this? How long do you think you can do that for, right? So, okay, we're in a really rough spot. We think we've got a case for some pretty major changes. But wait, there's more. You finally convinced your whole team, and the IT team never needed convincing to begin with, that you are ready for major reprocess or redesigning, major upheaval and changes. But you still have to convince upper management, right? And if they're worth their salt, the COO and the CEO will have heard that 70% of BPR efforts fail, because Harvard Business Review is going to be all over that, right? So if they're worth their salt, they're going to ask you the hard questions like, why would we do that? Why did we fail with these projects in the past? And what would we have to do differently to be successful this time? And as a business analyst, you're in your element because you're going to have data to show them this is why it's necessary right now. To answer their questions, why do BPR efforts fail? It fails, and I'm going to distill this all down to culture. Let's be absolutely clear here. Very many people will say they want change, but very few want to change once it really begins to dawn on them the level of effort that it's going to take to get there. So there's your prioritization trap, your squeaky wheel, and prioritizing the wrong efforts first because someone happens to be yelling the loudest about it. There's allowing your current technology and your current constraints to define your outcome. Thinking outside the box. Well, what if we didn't have that as a constraint? What if we looked at something else? Is that viable? This is solution analysis. This is options. What might work best for us here? An off-the-shelf product versus something customized. Having a very narrow and myopic approach to how you are going to move forward is also another thing that can cause you to stumble. You need to be thinking strategically for the long term. What is this going to look like in 3 years? What is this going to look like in 5 years? Where do we need to go to? Another one is getting tired and settling for good enough and quitting the whole thing too early. And on the flip side of that coin, dragging it out for way, way, way too long. Based on the conversations that I've had with business analysts when I gave this presentation, 18 months seems to be the sweet spot, no more than 2 years. You better be done and have a very viable product that people are bought into by the end of that 18-month to 2-year period, or you're going to get rapid drop-off in management interest. Be very mindful of your corporate culture and bringing along the right influential stakeholders, not just the people who get to make the decisions, but the people who don't get to make the decisions, but they control the grapevine, because their positivity or negativity could affect your adoption rate for whatever new process or new tool you're trying to achieve. And then leading from the bottom up. Unlike process management, where you're doing this tactically and on a day-to-day basis, this process redesign has to start at the very top level. And in our case, we got the buy-in of the CEO and the COO first, and then they took it to the board of directors and got the board of directors to agree to it as well and commit completely to that effort. And I don't mean just committing in name only. When we ask them to send out an email to rah for the team, they do it. They're at our beck and call for that sort of thing. And then let's also talk about inter-stakeholder conflict. You're going to have to deal with a lot of competing priorities. Marketing, as the breadwinner for the company, always thinks that their initiatives need to take precedence, which is how we ended up in a situation where the IT team was putting Band-Aids on our systems for years and years and years. Marketing is amazing. I love the folks that work there, and it's not just them. It's just that for most organizations, marketing tends to be the tail that wags the dog, right? So, all this in mind, let's talk about organizational pain. We had been working through all of these issues and all of these concepts internally in our project management office in 2018 before I started, and it continued through 2019 when I started, and this was still an ongoing conversation. And those conversations continued for months in the background while we quietly pushed for things to go a little farther forward. And ultimately, we brought the COO on board. And once he was on board, he went to the board of directors. And I wasn't there for that meeting, but I heard what happened afterwards. He said to the board, the last time we did a major technology upgrade to our systems, this was cutting edge technology. That was the year 2000. Oh, by the way, that was 19 years ago. We think we have turn of the century cutting edge technology. They don't even make Blackberries anymore. And then he pulled out his smartphone and he said, this is what I keep in my pocket every day. None of us would use a Blackberry when we have access to a smartphone. So why are we asking that of our business? The board green-lighted the project and we were off to the races. So in the end, it was finally a really compelling visual that non-technical people could get their heads wrapped around that made the difference. Would you want to do your work with a Commodore 64? I wouldn't. So Are you ready for it? BPR is fundamentally rethinking all of your business critical processes independent of how they're done today. Stop thinking in terms of this is the technology that we have, this is the number of people that we have. This is, if the system went down tomorrow and we couldn't get it back, what would we have to be able to continue working? So, critical success factors. Rule number 1, absolutely no sacred cows. There can be nothing off limits, no process, no person's 3-inch thick binder that they've been collecting since they started at the company 30 years ago. Nothing can be off limits. Everything has to be able to go under the microscope for you to rethink how you might do that differently. Next up, your top management has to be 100% committed and bought in, and demonstrate that publicly. They have to be your champions of change as a group and not just as one executive level sponsor. It's going to take the whole team to be on board with that. And they need to be able to articulate the vision that they're trying to go for very clearly. You can help them with that, and the project managers can help them with that. You can provide that messaging to them, but ultimately they're the ones that have to give it. Next up, you have to have that clear vision for that transformation. You want to identify and prioritize all your core processes. I've kind of reiterated that a couple of times, so I won't continue beating that dead horse. You have to have committed resources for the effort. And when we started down this path and we finally got the green light, we spent several months telling people, we can't just continue to do your web optimization projects. We will continue sending out mailings to our sponsors. We'll continue signing up new kids. But if it's not a keep the lights on project, we're not doing it, because every resource has to be dedicated to making this new replatforming effort happen. And we messaged that for a long time until we got buy-in from all of our business teams on it. You also need some skilled use of re-engineering techniques and organizational change management. You may not have those in-house. You may have some fantastic developers, and I couldn't tell you how great they are at their individual talents, but they may not have a lot of experience in complete re-engineering. Don't be afraid to advocate for the right vendor, and that process in itself is going to be time consuming. Took us a year to vet out vendors for that. Number 2, make sure you have someone who is well-versed in organizational change management. We business analysts know a thing or two about process and change management, but organizational change management at this level is its own discipline. The ACMP is its own professional organization with its own set of certifications for just that purpose. If you're going to go the distance, you owe it to yourself to get someone on board who can help you message that in its entirety in a way that will bring your whole organization along with you. So, been talking for a long time. I'm going to try and give you some time here for some questions at the end, because I have thrown a ton of material at you. Short version, process management is tactical, it's low risk, it happens as you go along, but business process redesign is start over. And maybe you do keep some of your existing processes. I'm not saying throw everything out and start from scratch. I'm saying you be very, very critical and keep the things that have the most value to you over the long term. That final thought. A BPR doesn't tweak. It's not about incrementing. It's not about evolving. It's starting over wherever it makes sense to start over. And because it's that disruptive, it has to be done very carefully and with a whole lot of buy-in from a whole lot of levels. But when it's successful, it can be transformative. So, I mentioned at the beginning that I probably had enough material for 2 or 3 or 4 presentations. And when we started this and when I wrote this, we were still talking about doing business process redesign. We were still talking about whether or not we were going to go down that path. Ultimately, we did. Now, starting in March of 2020, just as lockdowns were starting, everybody went home, set up their computers at home, and we immediately started workshopping. And when I say workshopping, I mean our business owners that we identified were in meetings with the vendor and with our product owners, which, by the way, my role has changed to product owner since then. They were in meetings sometimes upwards of 15 to 30 hours a week in that first 6 months. Heads down, war room style, building out a backlog, identifying current processes, identifying all the pain points, and bringing our vendor to a place where that vendor could help us build out a new solution. Ultimately, we did decide to double down on Microsoft products because we already had a partial Microsoft stack. So we are in the middle of building out a brand new Dynamics solution using their nonprofit accelerator, which is also brand new. And we are in the process of completely replatforming from the old system to the new system. And as we speak, we are getting ready to migrate over our first, what we're calling the friends and family batch of folks from the old system to the new system. It's a group of about 10 to 30 people that we're going to migrate from the old system to the new system as proof of concept that the data migration part of it works, and get the bare bones project going. This will continue all of this year and probably a good chunk of next year as well. So we have a long ways to go. So stay tuned because there is more to come. And on that note, I think I'm going to just kind of tell you, you can find me on LinkedIn. I have a Twitter handle. I'm honestly not there much, but you can also feel free to reach out to me. And it looks like there's some comments in the chat that I totally missed because I was not paying attention to it. So help me catch up. What questions do you have?
Thank you very much, Tamara. Please, participants, feel free to drop in your questions. Randy has a question, Tamara, so I'll read that out to you. So you mentioned that identify all of the things and then prioritize. In your experience doing this war room style, can you speak more about this part of your process and anything that was key to being successful in those sessions?
In that particular case, the vendor did a lot of the preliminary workshopping. At that point, they were far more proficient with the use of digital whiteboards than we were. We got up to speed fast because everybody, not only were we on lockdown, but we were having to use all the tools and change the way we were doing things. But yes, using a whiteboard and drawing things out made a huge deal of difference. We chose Azure DevOps as the tool by which we would store our backlog. And those user stories that we wrote for the backlog, we built them into epics and then features, and then within that, the user stories. And some of those user stories were as simple as, remember to consider Salesforce Marketing Cloud integrations. And they put a title in and they moved on. And we came back to it, 4 or 5 months later, knowing we needed to refine it, right? We're like, what were we thinking when this happened? So the first part of that process was literally just put it on a Post-it note, the equivalent of a Post-it note, and throw it up on that digital whiteboard. It may just be a sentence. It may have a little more detail to it. If somebody had enough wherewithal to put in the detail at the time, they did. We video recorded every single session. Have I watched all 1,800 hours of those? No, I haven't, not really. But they're there if we need to go all the way back to April 25th, 2020, and to that day we were talking about this topic and say, we can hopefully go back and kind of revisit our past selves. So. But yes, the first process was to build that backlog, and it was really, really rough. The second process was to go back through, prioritize all those things into, how we were going to build it out, and then start building out the detail with the business owners. And we now still have somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 6 hours a week worth of meetings that they're involved with on average. And my time, yeah, I was telling Randy when I first logged on, I had 13 meetings scheduled today. When I started my day, by the time I was done, I had 11. But yeah, I'm Zoom fatigue.
That hurts my heart. That was really great, a great process, and good to hear about that. And I love Azure DevOps also, so.
I should also mention that we decided that we were going to go agile, and I mean all in agile for this. We thought we were agile before, but our vice president brought us in and said, okay, I want you guys to start thinking about this as, what is the skateboard? What do we have to have a skateboard? Then you can build a scooter. Then you can build, and I'm sure you guys have seen that graphic that builds from the skateboard to the car, right? But that particular graphic has really helped our business owners get their heads wrapped around, okay, what's the absolute bare bones minimum we have to do a thing? And that's helped immensely in the prioritization process.
I love that because everybody wants everything.
Yeah.
So I can see that being helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tamara. Do we have any other questions from any of our participants?
Hey, this is Rob. I've got a question that's a little complicated for chat, so I didn't know if I would just state it. So my company, long story short, has gone through a merger and we formed into a new company. So with that, there's tons of confusion, tons of new things going on. Everything's working, between HR to operations to IT to everything, right? So one of the things that I would like to try to do as a BA, and then we do a lot of mobile afterthoughts, right? We only have a couple of apps that are out there. Our businesses with reinsurance for farming industries, insureds and agents and stuff like that. And everything is kind of an afterthought, not necessarily a core competency. So that's where and we have one lead developer that was supposed to have a team but never did because of this merger and other stuff that happened, that things just kind of got put on the back burner. And we both firmly believe strongly that, we need, because nobody else in our industry really has a core competency when it comes to mobile presence. So if we can do that, how do we transform into that core competency? Like, mobile's not an afterthought, it's a core competency. And we wanted to put together maybe some sort of flow of how the ownership should work. And so, I mean, it comes down, I think, to ownership, kind of what you talked about. How do we start from there? So I don't know if there's any thoughts from your side, just as far as like, what's probably the good starting point? Like, what should be the first 2 or 3 steps towards building maybe a core competency in something that everyone previously had treated as an afterthought?
I'm going to preface this by saying, I don't know where you're going to find the time for this if you're already fully engaged, but my first thoughts would be, 1, market research, do some data to prove out nobody else has got this, and wouldn't it be cool if we could increase our mobile presence this way because we think it would bring us this much in new revenue or whatever. You got to have the data to support it.
Right.
The second thing would be a proof of concept, to say what if, and sometimes, like the BlackBerry to smartphone example, to get someone who is not capable of wrapping their head around the technical concepts, give them something really easy to make a comparison to, and they get that. And if you can get that, then you're a lot closer to convincing them. And step 3, and I think this is probably the hardest part of all, is in our case, ultimately, we decided to go to a value stream product model. One sec, I sit right next to the refrigerator, so.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
So We ultimately decided that we were going to shift our approach to that of a product model and think about with our number one product being the relationship that we try to build between our sponsors and our kids, which is a very emotional and squishy thing, right? So how do we build that out as a product in the harsh marketing sort of way? And by going to that product model, we started to get our business owners thinking about what's your strategic vision for 3 years, 5 years down the road? What would that look like? We did go through an exercise where we wrote ourselves a postcard from the future. And it was the coolest little thing. I'd never heard of this before. We wrote ourselves a letter, our past selves. We said, "Dear Tamara in 2020, here we are in 2025. Oh my gosh, we never would have imagined that paper letters between our sponsors and our children would be a thing of the past and that they would be able to communicate with each other completely digitally. Yet, by going down this route, we did blah, 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 blah." So by using that postcard from the future and really trying to imagine what that future might look like, you might have some breakthroughs with your management. So brainstorming.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you, Tamara. I'll take maybe just one question, and then we'll round up. Tamara, sometimes when you're dealing with very complex and should I say, I'd use a very large enterprise level systems with multiple interconnected modules and parts, when you realize there's a need for process redesign, there's too many stakeholders at some points, there's too many connection points. How do you approach such a complex enterprise level business process redesign, either in chunks, in parts, or from the top? What would you advise in very large organizations?
I have to admit, I'm a slow adopter. And when our vice president said, we're going to go all in for this product model and agile and user stories, and we're changing your job title and all this, I was like, I don't know if I'm all up for that. A year later, I'm completely in. I am amazed, and I'm a complete convert. So what has really made a difference is taking that big ugly process, and I'll give you the example of payment exception processing. There is a legendary process model that is about 5 feet high by about 8 feet wide. They only printed it out one time. And that workflow, it's a technical workflow, right? That workflow represents every little if this, then do that, except when something else happens when someone tries to make a payment. And we said, okay, well, we've designed all these complex processes just to do all these exceptions and one-offs, and what if the sponsor only makes a partial payment, and what if that partial payment is 3 months behind, and all this stuff. What if we chuck it? Just ball it up, chuck it, start over. Do we need that? Do we really have to have that? Well, and how much exception processing do we actually have that has to go through all of this? And is that still worth it? Well, we just got a relationship with Stripe, and that completely changed how we can do payment processing. It simplified that process from 5 feet by 8 feet down into like a page, because Stripe can do all the things that in the year 2000, the technology at the time couldn't handle. So yeah, we really did go back and say, what if there was a world in which we didn't have 5 feet by 8 feet and we just handled it as it comes up and not try to build for every little edge case? Because that's what they had done over the years. They built something in for every single edge case that they came up with. So breaking it down, I think the long-winded answer to that is break it down into smaller and smaller and smaller bite-sized chunks until you can stomach it. Yeah. Which is where the beauty of Agile comes in. So.
Okay. One last question from Meg, and we'll try to wrap up in like a minute. With your BPR, are you building in, or will you be a step to review the process on a continuous basis?
There is going to be some continuous review. However, I have to admit that everyone is so heads down into what's the next thing that we have to build to be viable in this new system that we haven't gotten that far yet. I mean, to be perfectly honest with you, we haven't got all the governance in. And I'll be honest, governance is a dirty word in and of itself at Children International. What I have found is that the process of governance is not necessarily bad. They just don't like the word. So if you can find some way to soft pedal it and just say, hey, don't you think we ought to really put something in place so we could keep reviewing this and maybe only build for the 80% and not all the edge cases? If you can find the way to message that within our culture, corporate speak, then we're in pretty good shape. So agreed, the governance needs to be there, but we are down in the weeds right now.
All right, thank you, Tamara. Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Just to quickly close today's session, reminder, if you are interested in any of the IBA certifications, we have the 3 core certifications that, always stand out and make sure that we stand out in our organizations, equip us and give us value and techniques to be able to do our job better and to support our team, support our country, our companies, support our employers, support our processes and our end deliveries. There are specific certifications, business data analytics, the agile certification, as well as cybersecurity. If those are areas of interest, please make sure you check those out on the IBA website. Also would like to introduce reintroduce the specialization in product ownership analysis, which we may have gotten some emails about from IBA. Please follow this website to check that out. There is a guide to the product ownership analysis, free for members, as well as 4 very insightful blogs, which I've been able to read, and I tell you they are impressive. Those will give you a very good introduction into the product ownership analysis. Please, if you're not a member, endeavor to check out the membership perks of being an IBA member, not just a global member, but also a member of your local chapter, which is now covered under one membership cost at the global level. And of course, if you are a resident in South Florida, Miami-Dade County, Broward County, or Palm Beach County, please reach out to the president at southflorida.iba.org or myself or Randy on this call. We would love to bring you on board. Any skills you have, be it in marketing, be it in design, be it in administration, it doesn't have to be skills, right? We need to run the organization, so any soft skills, nothing is unlearnable to help the community grow. We have some events coming in the near future. The BA role in Agile projects by Dr. Michael White. Please save the date. This is also available on our website as well as on the IBA chapter events website, which you can access via the IBA website itself. We have a study group going on shortly to kick off in May for our BABAC version 3. This will enable you proceed into any of the core certifications, the ECBA, the CCBA, or the CBAP, and this will be facilitated by Dr. Bovan Anelka, amazing instructor, amazing fellow. He's taken us on one of our education sessions, beautiful professor, and his delivery is impeccable. So please, if you are interested, sign up for that study group. You don't have to take the exam now, but it's definitely going to be a session that will be of value. And then we'll be hosting Jennifer Bedell, who will take us down the path on slowing down, you move too fast, and how to be productive while feeling groovy in June. And then Paula Bell is going to take us through listen to understand and not respond, which is a very crucial value that we must have as BAs. And I hope that you all, as you have come in today, will be here for these next and subsequent events as we proceed through the year. Connect with us on our social platforms, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, as well as our YouTube page, where we have recordings of our events, social as well as educational sessions, and follow us for more information and announcements on our Twitter and LinkedIn handles. On this note, we conclude our event for today. We appreciate everyone for being here. We thank you for your time, and we wish you a wonderful evening and a beautiful rest of your week.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tamara. This was amazing.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tamara.
Hopefully I will get a chance to see everyone soon in person.
Oh, I hope so too.
We hope so too.
I'm vaccinated. I can travel now.
Oh, I'm one step away. I'd love to travel too.
That's awesome. All right. Have a good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.